Hello, Yakri here with my first Magic the Gathering video. So I just wanted to start doing some quick videos on deck lists in Magic the Gathering Arena because I feel like that's kind of something that isn't done very well by very many people. Instead, it's these really big bloated videos. So with that being considered, let's just jump into it. So this is a deck specifically for the current game mode of Magic 2020 Standard, right? Where we're post-rotation, but Eld isn't in yet, of course. And I have had a really hard time with this mode because I tried a variety of different deck lists that people were recommending. I tried some that I thought would be good, right? Mostly like Elemental Aggro, and I actually had the most luck with my own deck lists before trying this. I did pretty well with Elemental Aggro, really poorly with like some Grixis Control and some other deck lists that supposedly should be quite good. I don't know if it's because I'm just kind of lazy and wasn't in the first wave, right? And people have adjusted to that or whatnot. But I found this to be really consistent and fun, kind of fun to play, although it's not very interactive. So if you like more of a control type deck, I haven't found anything for this mode that I feel is actually good that is a control deck. So anyway, the basic game plan with this deck is you play your 2-drop creatures, which you have a lot of 2-drops, and you ramp really hard, right? You're probably going to be like, ideally your turn 2 is like you go turn 2, you play a 2-drop, you go turn 3, you play 2 2-drops, or a Risen Reef, right? And then you would really like to have Leyline of Abundance in your hand. If you really hate having to try, you could always abandon the mode over and over again until you get a good hand starting with Leyline of Abundance, but it's not necessary to win games. So with that ramp, you cast Cavalier of Thorns, you cast Hydroid Krasis, and you cast Mass Manipulation. I would say you cast Nissa, but she's kind of your actual ramp to get into Mass Manipulation, right? Something that's really important to remember with this deck is that you only need 3 blue mana sources to cast Mass Manipulation if you have Nissa, because, of course, you can just tap a blue mana source, untap it with her +1, tap it again, and there you go. Incubation Druid is also... Incubation and Paradise Druid are actually kind of more important than they might look initially. Leafkin Druid is probably your preferred 2-drop because he has 3 toughness, and he can potentially tap for 2 later on. However, Paradise Druid and Incubation Druid help you cast Mass Manipulation if you didn't get enough blue lands. But you do need at least 1. So that's it. That's the whole game plan. The deck is pretty simple. Just try and ramp really hard. I'm going to do a little bit, I'm going to just put after this a little video of me playing versus the bot. Super simple game plan stuff. You know, if you have like more than ultra beginner experience with Magic the Gathering, I would just skip the rest of the video. But I do think this deck is really good in this mode, and I'd like to say why really quickly before I cut. So the reason I think it's super good is simply because this game mode where we've rotated, right, most stuff out, it's slower. And a lot of the answers for this type of deck don't exist. As such, you can kind of just get away with derping around the first 4 turns. If your opponent does play aggro, you should have decent options if you get down a Leafkin Druid, right? You can, or even a Paradise Druid to block a couple of early cards when you need to. But if you're versus aggro, you can kind of just concede in the first game, or the second game, I guess you won't know. But if you get Leyline of Abundance out, it's kind of easy. Just they get 2 turns to swing at you, and then on turn 3, you're probably dropping like Cavalier of Thorns, and something like Cavalier of Thorns is like super hard to deal with if they're playing aggro. If they're playing control, they get a little bit of a better option. Maybe they can exile Cavalier of Thorns. Same kind of situation for Hydroid Krasis. But then after that turn, right, we're on like turn 4 or 5 and aggro hasn't won versus this deck, you're in a situation to drop Mass Manipulation or Hydroid Krasis and just completely blow them out. Or, you know, in Hydroid Krasis' case, you don't necessarily blow them out, you stall. And there you go, you're kind of going to win the game. I think the biggest threat is this Cavalcade of Calamity, super fast, super low number of creatures, just try and get lucky on your draws deck with a little extra burn. That's going to be a big threat for this deck, but I haven't seen people playing it. I think it was really popular like the first day this mode came out. If it gets popular again, there are some options you could do here. You can just do Elemental... Okay, so there are a couple other alternative options, which would be Healer of the Glade and Overgrowth Elemental. Overgrowth Elemental, of course, you chump block with other creatures, and then you gain life. Healer of the Glade, you gain life, and it's a chump blocker. That's decent versus aggro, especially Cavalcade of Calamity, which plays a lot of 1-drops. And you can include some of those guys instead of like Growth Spiral and instead of Paradise Druid. The main difference of my list between other lists as well is I've reduced the number of Cavalier of Thorns and Mass Manipulation down from 4 to 3, because I think that even at 3 ofs, you kind of have to make them 3 ofs because you need to get them, but even at 3-ofs, you sometimes draw them more than you want early on. And that pretty much explains this deck. It's my preferred way to kind of grind a little extra mastery XP. So yeah, good luck. Hope you enjoy it. Okay, so this is not a great starting hand. I'm going to keep it anyway because, well, this is a informational video, not an actual match, but also because there's a chance I can pull off a win with this, provided my opponent does not have a particularly fast start themselves. That is to say, their start is kind of average. They aren't playing red deck wins, probably like the Cavalcade of Calamity variety, or their start is bad as well. Maybe they have the mulligan once. This is going to be good enough because I can play 2 lands, which is going to allow me to play Incubation Druid, which then gives me access to potentially 2 water if I need it, making it easier to cast Mass Manipulation later on. In fact, I can adapt Incubation Druid and get most of the way there. Leafkin Druid is also pretty solid, and 3 copies of Nissa, that's the real biter. That's not what I want, but I could just play her into removal and then play her again and then play her again, which does give me, in the right situation, I don't mind that, as long as I draw the kind of cards I need to make this work, which would be like another land and maybe a 3-4 cost card. That doesn't actually happen. I drew Mass Manipulation, not great, but I do draw the 3rd land. That was the really key thing. By turn 3, I need to have drawn a 3rd land, and I do that. Now, versus another opponent, this would have been a little bit more problematic. A real player probably would have played actual removal, but close enough. So now I've made it along to turn 4, and I'm able to play Nissa finally. If my opponent hadn't had any removal, say a slow start, or a deck that doesn't play a lot of removal, maybe just plays their own creatures, this would have been really good for me because I could have played her a turn earlier and probably won this game very quickly. Since my opponent does not have a way to remove Nissa immediately, I'm in a really good position now, right? As you can see, I have enough sources, 4 blue sources, right? And I've got Nissa on the field, and I have 2 mana dorks. So I can cast Mass Manipulation for a pretty good amount very quickly here, especially if I abuse her +1, okay? So this game's kind of in the bag at this point versus a lot of decks. And how this actually ended up going is it's just versus the computer, so they play a lot of creatures, and this is a deck, actually something similar to this, using Fairy Miscreants and a lot of flying creatures, is a deck that I've seen a couple times in the M20 new event, but it's pretty bad. I wouldn't recommend it, but I've seen it a lot, and I have beaten it with this deck versus an actual person as well. So now I'm just going to take control of all of their creatures, and boom, that's it. That's how you play this deck. You just let's let this go through. You just play some mana dorks, you get a couple lands, you play Nissa, you get one of your 2 win condition cards, and win the game. Possibly I just keep creating like man lands until I can make them indestructible and win that way. You can also use a Leyline of Abundance's ability to give all your creatures +1/+1 as a backup, but those 2 methods are not as good as Mass Manipulation for the win, or playing a Hydroid Krasis for the win. In my opinion, it's not as strong of a way to win the game, but they do work. So let's recap this. Really simple. Play your lands, play your mana dorks. You can take any hand which kind of gives you one of your bigger spells you want to cast plus ramp, right? So some mana dorks, some land, a Nissa, a Risen Reef, a Cavalier of Thorns, a Mass Manipulation, a Leyline of Abundance. If you have one of those cards in your opening hand, lands and mana dorks, at least 2 lands, at least 1 mana dork, that's a pretty good hand, basically. And it's not too crazy hard to do this, especially in this format where it's a little bit more restricted and you don't have access to as many good things. So other people are in the same boat as you, but maybe worse off. So yeah, that's it. I love this deck. I'm having a lot of fun with it, at least compared to the other options for this event. See y'all next time.